Welcome to this video. In this lesson we are going to analyze some of the greatest conflicts during the 50s and the 60s. In particular, we are going to focus on the Cold War and its consequences, the Chinese Revolution led by Mao Zedong, the Korean War, and in conclusion, the Vietnam War.
This is the situation in Europe after Second World War. After Germany's defeat, USA and USSR were the biggest states in the world. USA controlled most of Western Europe, so United States and 10 European countries created on 4th April 1949 North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was a pact with the aim to protect states of NATO defending each other from USSR's attacks. These countries founded themselves on a democratic and capitalist ideology. Instead, Eastern Europe was governed by USSR, who took the control based on a totalitarian communist ideology. The desire of these countries to demonstrate their power and importance of their ideologies brought to a contention which lasted for 50 years, the Cold War. This war is named Cold because there has never been direct military conflicts, but it was based on political and diplomatic clashes because everybody knew that, if atomic bombs began to be used, there was just death without victories. For example, USSR installed in Cuba in 1962 missile launchers just to provoke and send a message to USA. However, thousands of people died because of this war. For example, Soviet soldiers killed 3,000 people during protests in Budapest in 1956 and 2,000 people during Prague Spring in 1968. Furthermore, almost 600 people died trying to climb over the Berlin Wall between 1961 and 1988.
So now I'm going to talk about the consequences of the Cold War, which involve several fields, like the military, the political, the social, and the technological field. So about the military consequences, after the collapse of the USSR, we have the dissolution of the Warsaw Covenant, and after the dissolution of this pact, the NATO emerged into the world as the only powerful alliance of independent states, and also the United States became the most powerful country of the world. During the Cold War, communism became one of the most powerful, innovative and famous ideology because it was seen as a revolution. But after the collapse of the USSR, it was seen only as failure, and so for this reason there was a worldwide strengthening of the Western political system. So during the Cold War, there was the creation of many new states due to the end of colonialism and the USSR dissolution. And also there was the development and diffusion of revolutionary ideologies like the struggle for civil rights, which involved the racial segregation and student riots. Also, during the Cold War, we had a significant technological development, especially in the military and space fields, and many of these new technologies will be applied in the society, and an example is Internet.
With the end of the World War II and the surrender of the Japanese, China faced a dramatic period. The war between the two countries, known as the Sino-Japanese War, that started before the World War II, caused about 20 million deaths, and a terrible famine spread through the agricultural areas. From a political point of view, the country was divided in two separated blocks. The communists, led by Mao Zedong, which counted a very large number of soldiers, and the nationalists, economically supported by the USA. In 1947, the Chinese Communist Army was able to defeat the attack of the nationalists and to invade the rest of the country. The October 1, 1949, in Beijing, Mao Zedong declared the birth of the National Chinese Republic during the retreat of the Nationalist Army in the island of Taiwan. The USA wanted to help the nationalists in order to prevent a future alliance between the Communist Russia and China. The United States, in fact, after the Civil War, did not recognize and accepted the new Communist Republic. On the other hand, the USSR, led by the communist Joseph Stalin, supported immediately Mao and his new regime. In 1950, with the outbreak of the Korean War, which opposed the communist side of the North to the more pro-American side of the South, the Chinese Republic confirmed the support to the USSR, providing to the North Korean communists a strong military help. With the intervention of 700,000 Chinese soldiers, the conflict between the Koreans lost the characteristic of an invasion and became a slow guerrilla war that ended with terrible consequences in 1953. In the same years of the Korean War, the Chinese Communist Republic's leader Mao Zedong, with the creation of some political and agricultural reforms, created the foundation of the new communist regime that, after a few years, turned out to be one of the most dramatic moments for the Chinese population.
The Korean War. After the World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union liberated Korea from the Imperial Japanese control, but it was divided into two parts on the 30th parallel. The northern, administered by the Soviet Union under the communist leadership of Kim Il-sung, and the southern, administered by the United States under the anti-communist leadership of Syngman Rhee. The conflict quickly escalated on the 20th June 1950, when the North Korean military, supported by the Soviet Union and China, invaded South Korea. The UN and USA provided around 90% of the military South Korean personnel in order to repel what was recognized as a North Korean invasion. The last 2 years of the conflict became a war of attrition until the fighting ended on the 27th July 1953, when the Korean Armistice Agreement was signed, creating the Korean Demilitarized Zone. The particular thing is that no peace treaty was ever signed, and the two Koreas are technically still in a frozen conflict. So now let's see some interesting facts. The Korean War was among the most destructive conflicts of the modern era. In fact, we are talking about 3 million war fatalities. It had a larger proportional civilian death toll than World War II or the Vietnam War. There was a huge mass killing of tortured and starved prisoners of war by the North Korean government, and thousands of suspected communists by the South Korean government. In conclusion, North Korea became among the most heavily bombed countries in history.
The Vietnam War was a long and violent conflict between the communist government of North Vietnam and the South Vietnam, which was helped by its principal ally, the USA. After the communist forces took power in the north, armed conflict between northern and southern armies continued until the northern decisive victory in the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in May 1954. You know that the Vietnam was a French colony since the end of the 19th century. Well, after this battle, the French colonial rule ended in Indochina. The subsequent treaty signed in July 1954 at Geneva Conference split Vietnam along the latitude known as the 17th parallel. The treaty also called for nationwide elections for unification to be held in 1956. In 1955, however, the strongly anti-communist politician Ngo Dinh Diem pushed the President-Emperor aside to become the president of the government of the Republic of Vietnam, so the conflict continued, with the Cold War intensifying worldwide. The United States ordered its policies against any allies of the Soviet Union. The President Eisenhower in 1955 had pledged his support to Diem and South Vietnam. At first, the USA sent to the South Vietnam economic help, weapons, ammunitions, but in March 1965 the President Johnson made the decision, with solid support from the American public, to send US combat forces into the war in Vietnam. After only 2 years as the war stretched on, some US soldiers began to mistrust the government's reason for keeping them there. The later years of the war saw increased physical and psychological deterioration among American soldiers. By the new technologies, such as television, some images and news appeared to the American public, which immediately understood the seriousness of the situation in Vietnam. So there were a lot of anti-war demonstrations until the January of the 1973, when the peace agreement between USA and North Vietnam was signed. In 1975, the Viet Cong conquered the capital of southern Vietnam, which was Saigon, and ended the conflict. and Vietnam was reunified. After years of warfare, the war absolutely inflicted a devastating toll on Vietnam's population and economy. Furthermore, the Vietnam War is considered one of the most unsuccessful US conflicts. Actually, the war brought discontent to the population and the economic damages and losses were unprecedented. Many people died or were seriously injured. Furthermore, the large sums of money spent in the conflict led to widespread inflation. Psychologically, the effects ran ever deeper. Actually, the war had pierced the myth of American invincibility. In conclusion, I would like to suggest a song, The Ballad of the Green Berets, which became one of the biggest pro-war songs during the Vietnam era. Written originally by Barry Sadler, the song made its debut in 1963. It was inspired by Sadler's time in US Air Force and Army. The Army began to use Sadler's song to instill hope in the American people.
Thank you so much for your attention, and we hope that you enjoyed this lesson.